Hello. I work with a team out in Montana on a project that over time will span about 30 years. Our goal is to create the largest wildlife refuge ever assembled in the lower 48 states. We have been at it about 15 years now. Progress is going well. And I think I really have to give credit to some very favorable conditions that exist and are helping us with our success. I don't think these conditions exist just in Montana or even in the United States, but all around the world to a certain extent. And I think when you add them all up, they may add up to us being in one of the very best times to go really big with large-scale conservation. So I'd like to tell you about what a few of these conditions are that I'm thinking of, use our project as an example, and see what you think about this premise. We're working here in the northeastern part of Montana. The reserve we're going for will be about 3.5 million acres. It's largely untilled. It has an incredible wildlife history. It's depopulating. Land is for sale for a reasonable price. And for these and other reasons, we think this is an absolutely exceptional place to do a reserve of this scale. One of the reasons we're out there is scientists tell us there are only 4 places left on Earth of this size on the grasslands where you can do something this big. All those places are shrinking. They're being plowed up at the edges to grow more food. So we're working up here on the northern Great Plains and trying to save a very big swath of this place before it's all gone. Another reason to do it is when we had our golden age of park building here in the United States from about 1870 to about 1950, we stopped with Grand Teton when it became very difficult to do anymore. We missed the grasslands. And the grasslands have a carrying capacity for wildlife that can exceed all of our other parks combined. So our intention is to working up here in northeastern Montana is to build the largest ever done, more than 1 million acres bigger than Yellowstone Park, put all the biodiversity back, and save it for future generations. History tells us people have been living on this landscape for the last 12 to 14,000 years or so, and in conjunction with an extraordinary array of variety of wildlife. But the situation changed very recently. Just about 180 years ago, a very new player showed up here, and for the first time, they brought livestock and barbed wire fences. And within the next 30 to 40 years, all these critters you see here and more were completely eradicated from an area the size of the Serengeti. Not just diminished in number, but completely gone. Every bison, every grizzly bear, wolf, bighorn sheep, etc. But we think with a very new model of park building that we're working with, we can put not only all of this back, but everything from the microbes in the soil to the reptiles to the pollinators to the grassland birds. And one thing, so the first condition I want to point out is we think if we can find 3.5 million acres in the lower 48 states in a very crowded and noisy and politically contentious place, I think there are places all around the world, terrestrial and in the seas, that are left to be saved. The second condition that I think we can get excited about, you're looking at a map here of our project area. It's about 250 miles wide. The colors tell you land ownership patterns are very complex. But we learned a lot from other industries in thinking about this. That's mining, oil and gas, timber, and cattle ranching. And that is, if you can buy just a relatively small amount of private land, you can co-opt huge amounts of public land. So when we asked, could we do this for our purposes, which is saving nature, wildlife, and biodiversity, the answer was yes. We set about very quickly then acquiring land. What you're seeing in the blue blotches there are 25 very large-scale acquisitions totaling about 355,000 acres, and it's growing rapidly. A point I want to make here, condition number 2, is we may be in the best time ever to work with governments where there's mutuality in public-private partnerships. And we should get excited about that condition too and what we can do with it. As we move along, we'll eventually create a reserve that looks something like this. That's about the size of the state of Connecticut. It's about 5,000 square miles. We don't intend to have any fence around that border. That's key. You all know who work in conservation that you then create another problem at the edge, because there's usually an industry out there. For us, there's cattle ranching, about 200 large-scale cattle ranchers growing over 500,000 head of cattle. They're the ones who wanted this wildlife gone in the first place, so how do we make them whole? How do we make them winners in this unfolding story? Not easy. We have a number of things in play, but I want to tell you about just one of them. Believe it or not, we started a beef company. Wild Sky is the only wildlife-friendly beef label in the United States. We take grass-fed, all-natural beef, turn them into products like this, and we ship 45,000 pounds a month into high-end markets around the US. It's a for-profit company. The model has us taking the profits from this company and giving them to ranchers, like Ronnie and Dave Krasko here, who ranch on Fort Belknap Indian Reservation in that purple area. Wild Sky ranchers agree to operate with strict wildlife-friendly, biodiversity-friendly protocols of our design, and it's the exact same thing we judge ourselves in our progress inside the core. They come in and establish a baseline. They're like coming into a frequent flyer program in the airlines. You enter at silver, gold, you go for platinum level, and each year you make more money as a result of getting more biodiversity friendly. Another way to make money is through the camera traps that we'll put around your ranch. So as you get pictures of burrowing owls, of wolves, maybe a grizzly bear, a cougar like this, black bears, etc., and send them to us each month, for each photograph, we'll pay you hundreds of dollars for keeping those animals alive. Our next step is to work with school systems, getting school kids to help us manage the camera trap systems. They learn science along the way, and schools take a share of these profits. So think about this as we start to populate this purple area with Wild Sky ranches. Really what they are small conservancies that are also running cattle. And the key thing is that lessens the difference between the outside and the inside, because we're both pursuing the highest possible levels of biodiversity, albeit for different reasons. If you back this out and scale it up even further, what you're seeing in the corner is American Prairie Reserve eventually, and the surrounding ecosystem. 300 miles distance are other big protected areas around Glacier Park and Yellowstone National Park. If we apply that Wild Sky model in the wildlife dispersion corridors between these big protected areas, we can create a path of least resistance or increased social carrying capacity for wildlife, allowing grizzly bears, wolves, and other animals to move back and forth, making a much, much richer and more sustainable situation. So the third condition I want to talk about is sometimes we're very judgmental about for-profit companies only being about maximizing shareholder value. But if we think about it, we can creatively kind of swirl them together and think more about what if we could make for-profits be the engine driving our conservation visions. We read a lot of books at APR. I make people read books and articles. Most of them they like. This is one of my favorites, Steal Like an Artist. The concept here is no artist is 100% original. We take ideas from our contemporaries, we look back hundreds of years, take the best of things, mix them with our own style, and go forward with our customized persona of who we are. I think conservationists, as conservationists, we can do more of this ourselves, get out of our own problem-solving silos. Here's some examples. Wild Sky was not our original idea. I learned this on a trip to Namibia, talking with Lori Marker of the Cheetah Conservation Fund. She was trying to save cheetahs in a big, huge cattle area. Brought the idea back, thought about it for a couple of years, and we created this for-profit company that I just mentioned. But it was not our idea. Fundraising is really tough. All of you know that, nonstop. We were having a very difficult time getting people to come out and see our very remote area, particularly supporters. So on a trip to Botswana, another area, in a very remote area with Beverly and Derek Jobert, I realized there's camps that are very interesting and can get people to come to remote areas. We came back, thought about it a couple of years, and built what's called Kestrel Camp here on the American Prairie Reserve. And I'll tell you, it never would have occurred to us to build tents with interiors that look like this. But we did, and now supporters say, hey, I can camp like that. And they come more often, and they're very turned on by the way we tour them around with our naturalist guides, one of them here is in the room here today with me, and inspire them firsthand with the magnitude and the romance of this vision that we have for this big reserve. Our fundraising has improved as a result, but those camps was not our idea at all, it was somebody else's. This is a new one I'm working on right now. I've just reached out to Esteban Payan with Panthera. He's in Colombia working on jaguars, and I think he may have solved a problem we have in Montana. In Montana, the cows out in that purple area are not raised to be particularly bright. Some people feel the less thoughts going through a cow's mind, the better. They're easier to handle that way, but when predators come by, they also have no thoughts about that. That leaves them vulnerable. Esteban found a cow, or breed, called the San Martinero cow. They still have a very strong predator reaction trait, and they chase away jaguars, believe it or not. If you can imagine 50 of those saying, I can't stand jaguars. The jaguar says, I feel the hostility, and I'm going to leave. We need some of that with wolves and grizzly bears. We don't want to load cows like this on airplanes, but we can do little bottles of sperm, bring them up, genetically run them into the cows where we are, and hopefully get some of these traits back again, possibly. So with all of these conditions, I've only had time to talk about a few. Just think of these. There's more land, as E.O. Wilson says, let's save half for biodiversity. There's plenty out there, I think, to save half. Governments, I think, are their best place ever to look at mutuality-based public-private partnerships. If we think differently about for-profits, we can start them ourselves, and our nonprofits own them, and they can help drive our conservation missions. And I gotta believe, because I've experienced this, there's hundreds of people that are smart and sharp like Esteban there around the world, and they have way ahead of us, and they have solutions to our problems that we can bring home and convert to local area problems. So to me, when you think about these conditions, I don't think we're at any sort of a dark ages in large-scale conservation at all. I think, in fact, we might be at the front edge of what we could call a renaissance that might last for a very, very long time. We need to recognize these conditions exist. We need to commit to long-haul projects and stick with it, help each other out a lot, and go out and get big things done. Thank you.